Hey guys, it's Logan again, back with another tutorial on creating an advanced platformer in GameMaker Studio 2. In this video, we're going to be going over implementing all of our previously created animations and sprites into our player with code. So the first thing I want to do is kind of show you a couple of the different variations I made of the idle eye move. So after the last video, I made a couple more and also a couple edits. The first one I did was just cutting away the top 2 pixels of the eyes and then putting the pupils in the middle, and he kind of looks like he's glaring at us a little bit with a little bit of an annoyed look. The second one I did on the one where his eye is slightly winced by 1 pixel, he's looking down. I actually changed that from him looking straight ahead. I thought it looked a little bit better. And I also did the same thing with the kind of one-eyed open and one-eyed half shut thing. I just put him looking down kind of at his gun, like, what's going on here? And then one more thing I wanted to show you guys. So y'all can make those edits, and remember, you can make as many of these variations as you would like. And another thing I want to show you, so remember I've been getting irritated at GameMaker not saving the snapping to grid and that kind of thing. Well, you can actually change that stuff and have it saved. So how you do that, and I believe it's Nicotine, shout out to you, he brought this up in the comments. How you do that is you go to the file, and then go to Preferences, and it's going to be under Image Editor. And then after you get this drop down, you can go to Grid Settings and change the horizontal pixel spacing to 4, and in our case, the vertical pixel spacing to 4, and check mark the display grid and snap to grid. And you can also change the line of the grid in the line color, and I set mine to a low alpha value so that it's semi-transparent. And then hit apply, and now when you open up the image editor, you're good to go on your snapping and all that stuff. We don't have to change that. You just have to change your brush size to 4 again. And now you're ready to go. That's going to save some time for our future animations and our future sprites. And the final thing I want to say before we get started with the code is now is the time, if you have ideas for story, ideas for the theme of the game, which we kind of have a theme. It's kind of space themed. He's a little alien, but I mean an environment. What kind of environment would you like to learn how to create in pixel art? Like I said, story, maybe enemy types. Remember, it's going to be a shooter. So, and we have the mechanic with flying, so we can have flying and floating enemies, things like that. So any kinds of ideas you guys can start putting down in the comments, and I'll be considering them, and I'll be creating the environments and stuff based on your feedback. And if I don't get any feedback, I'm just going to go off my intuition. And just to get you started, I feel like our player, he kind of has an attitude about him, right? So like I said, with these animations and states we created for the idle, he looks a little bit like he has a bit of an attitude, and you could start with that. And I kind of go backwards with character creation on how I do it. I kind of mess around with pixels until I get something, and then I go on with that, and I'm like, oh, that looks like this, and I base the character off that. When usually people, they start by creating a personality and a background, and then they develop their character's look on that. And I guess I'm not creative, so that doesn't happen. So I wait till I stumble on an accident like I did with this player, and I kind of go off of what I created. So anyways, enough of all that game design theory stuff. Let's get into the programming. So the first thing we're going to do is create the jetpack. And remember, we have 2 jetpack states on and off. This is really simple. The first thing we're going to do is delete the draw event from the player, which I might accidentally have that deleted because I've tried this video twice already. So you have your draw event, open up your player, just go ahead and delete the entire draw event. We don't need it for now. So click it, right click, and then hit delete event, and you're good to go. Remember, the draw event, not the step event. And that's going to get rid of our jetpack draw. We're actually going to make a separate jetpack object. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's do create O jetpack. No, let's name it O player jetpack. Good to go. And let's hit create. Not a create event, sorry. Let's do a step event. Delete the create event. Right click, delete step event. We just need to reposition it. So in the description, right after description, we're going to insert reposition and change image direction. So we're going to flip the image based on the player and reposition it to the image to the player's position. So we're going to do x equals o player.x, y equals o player.y, and then we're going to do image x scale equals o player dot x scale. So we're just stealing the values from the player. That's all we need to do. Oh, what did I do here? O player dot image x scale. And so we're gonna hit play, and we're gonna observe our jetpack doesn't look right because we didn't create it. So let's go to our our script initialize player. And we need to create the jetpack, and we're actually going to store the instance ID in a variable called jetpack. So how we're going to do that is we're going to do jetpack. So this is a variable name equals instance create depth. Once again, we're going to create a separate layer for it. No big deal. As long as you aren't doing it for 1 million instances, this isn't going to be a terrible thing to do. So, sorry. So instance create depth, and we're going to create it at our X and our Y. And where are we going to create it? Well, directly behind our player. And remember, a greater depth is further behind all the other images. So we're going to use depth plus 1. And we're creating O player jetpack. Another thing we didn't do is assign the sprite to our jetpacker. That's what I didn't do. You probably did it, and you're yelling at me right now, and that's okay. So now we have a reference to what instance we just created, which is our jetpack, our O player jetpack. So we can use that later to change some variables. So let's go ahead and go into our jetpack and assign it its sprites, which is going to be in our player sprites folder. It's going to be in our jetpack folder. It's going to be our jetpack off. Well, when do we want to turn it on? Well, we want to turn it on when we're flying. We want to turn it off when we're not flying. So we simply go into our script update player movement. Not update player movement. Exit out of that. I'm always wrong. Our script update player animation. And when we are jetpacking, we're going to turn our jetpack on. So we simply go below our code and we type in jetpack dot sprite index equals s player jetpack on. So we referenced our jetpack instance ID, and we access its sprite index, and we set it equal to our jetpack on sprite, which is right here. So now when we are jetpacking, that's what's going to happen. Well, what happens when we're falling? The exact opposite. We're changing it to S player jetpack off. So I'm copying this line with Control C, and I'm going up here right above. Let's go right below image speed, and let's just put off instead of on. And now we should see our jetpack animated. That simple. These state machines are really cool with our vertical state.falling. I mean, super simple, really easy to read code. So that looks really nice. And now all that's left to do for you guys to catch up to the original preview you saw before we get into implementing shooting and all that stuff is do our idle animations, which is actually going to be a little bit not complex, but I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. You guys might have better ideas, and please leave those in the comments, and I'll be releasing a video where we're going to go through and comment and review our code so we make sure we understand it, and I'm also going to be implementing some new optimizations as we go along. So what do we need? Well, we have our idle images. Number one, we have our sprite player idle, our S player idle, which is our still image of the character idle looking forward. That's where we need to initialize our images when we first go into our idle state. So after we go into our idle state, we want to wait a few seconds before we start implementing like our looking around of the eyes, or we implement our blink. And if you remember, those are two separate things because our looking around state is one single frame while our blinking is an animation. So we're going to have to treat them a bit differently. So as you can tell from all my talking, it's going to be a little bit of code to do. So all of this is going to take place in our idle state. Where is our idle state? Well, I commented it. It's right here. This is our idle state. So when our vertical state is on ground, which means we're touching the ground, and our x speed is 0, which means we're not moving left or right, we are idle. So what we're going to do is execute a new script in here so we don't have to write all of this code out and break up our neat code. So what we're going to do is use a script called script handle idle animations. And that's it. And we're actually going to delete the sprite index equals sPlayer idle because, again, our handle idle animation script is going to handle that. And what I did is hit Control X. It's going to cut and copy, or I guess cutting is copying. I'm not sure. It's going to cut and copy. Now we need to make our script under our player group. So let's create a script and let's name it scr underscore handle player idle animations. I think we're actually going to have to go up and fix handle idle animations in this code, and we're going to have to name it handle player idle. I like to put player in there because what if you have an enemy that has the same functions? Then you'd be calling the enemy script also. So for a player, we're going to call player. For an enemy, we're going to call handle enemy idle animations. Okay. And now let's go into our handle player idle animations script. Remember, don't be afraid of using long names for scripts. You want them to be descriptive so you can understand what they're saying in the hierarchy of the folders as well as in the code. Okay, so first I'm going to paste the first line that we had, which is our sprite index equals sPlayer idle. Well, since we're going to allow separate images other than sPlayer idle be played, we don't want this played every single frame, or every frame it's going to set our sprite index to idle and we're never going to see any movement. So how we're going to treat this is by using a flag, and a flag is kind of a toggle switch. So basically we're saying, is this something true? And if it is, then I want to execute this and set it that specific something to false. So next time it reads it, it's not going to execute the code again. So how we're going to do this is using a variable that we haven't created that we're going to create called idle flag. And what we're going to say is we're going to start with our idle flag. We're going to say not idle flag. So basically our idle hasn't been flagged yet, then we're going to execute this code. So we're saying if not idle flag. We're going to use the braces because we're going to have more than one line of code. And obviously we need to initialize this variable inside of our create event, which is our initialize player script. So let's move to our initialize player script. And down here at the bottom, below everything else, let's comment and say idle animation variables. So we can tell ourselves what is under this comment, and we know. So we have our idle flag. We're going to set it to false initially. And what else are we going to need? So like I said, we need a timer of some kind, right? To be able to wait for a few seconds before we start playing the different animations for our idle state. And we're going to name this idle animation timer. And we're going to set it to 0 initially. No big deal. And these are the only two variables we're going to need for our idle. So let's go back to our update player animation script. And not our idle animations. I moved my idle animations up, by the way, to keep this all in order. We're going to our update player animations. So in order for our flag to work, we need to be able to reset it. So let's go back to our idle animations. I'll show you what I mean. So right now it's set to not idle flag. That's what we initialized it as. We're going to execute this code, but we don't want to execute it again, which means we're going to have to change the value of idle flag, and we can change it to true. And now this code will not play again until we reset idle flag to false. And when do we reset idle flag to false? Well, let's go back into our update player animations script. I'm actually gonna, sorry, I didn't increase the font size before this. And we can change that flag state back to false when we start moving. So we need to go to all of our moving states, which our first one, which is kind of hidden from us, not really hidden, but it's not apparent, is our on-ground state when our x speed is not 0. So when we're moving left or right, we are not idle. So we need to set our idle flag equals false because we're not idle. So we set the flag to false. I'm going to copy it with Control C. We're going to do the same thing for falling because if we're falling, we're not idle. And we're going to do the same thing for jumping because if we're jumping, we're not idle. Now we don't need to put it in jetpacking. And the reason is to get to this jetpacking state, we have to go through our falling state first. So that means that our idle flag is going to be set in our falling state before our jetpacking state gets initialized. So don't worry about putting it in your jetpack state. Okay, so now we have the flag set up. And let's go back to our handle player animations. So our flag set up. What else do we need to initialize here? Well, we need to initialize our timer. Remember, our timer is at 0. We need to set our timer to a value. Remember, our timer name is idle animation timer. And we're going to set it to a base value of 60. So we don't want it any less than 60. 60 is 1 second at a room speed of 60, which is what we're at. So we're at 1 second. And then we're going to add on a random value to it because we want it to kind of start randomly to give it a little bit of extra life. So I'm going to use round before we use random because random returns it can return like a not integer value. It can return like 0.5 or 0.6 or 0.7. 0.7777 it can return. So we're just going to round it for good measure. So we're going to use round random. And then we're going to give it just a random value. This is totally up to you. I'm going to use 150 just to show you guys. And this is all we need inside of this code. So what's the next thing we need to do? Well, we need to see if our timer has reached 0. And right now our timer is not being decreased at all, so it's going to always stay here. But we can decrease it at the same time we check it, and I'll show you how to do that. So you can write if minus minus idle animation timer is less than or equal to 0, then execute some code. Now, if you aren't sure what minus minus does, it actually decrements this value before it does anything else. So it's going to subtract 1. It decrements by 1. It's just like using idle animation timer minus equal 1. But the difference is we can use it in this statement or this expression, and it will decrement this value before it does this check of less than or equal to. So we don't even have to decrement it inside this code block because it's being performed right here. So let's say our idle animation timer after being decremented is equal to 0 or it's less than 0. We use less than or equal to just for good measure, because what if you are at 0.1 and you decrement by 1? Well, now you're at negative 0.9 and it skipped over it. So if you were using equal, it's never going to return true. So we use less than or equal to just for good measure. And let's say our timer ran out. Well, now we need to choose whether we want to do a blink or whether we want to do one of the eye variations of him looking around. And for each of those, we need to treat it differently. So, but before we do that, let's just go ahead and reset the timer, because remember, our timer is at 0, so let's just reset it. Idle animation timer equals, you could just do 6, I'll do 50 on this one, plus round random 150. So it's going to reset it, so this code will execute again after the timer runs out. And then we're going to do a little thing that I like doing using the choose statement. So we're going to do if choose true. I'll explain it in a second. False, false, false. Then we will execute the code in here. So choose is going to choose one of these values in here. So we're giving true a 1 of 4 chance in being chosen. And if true is chosen, then this entire value will be true, which means this code in here will execute. And the reason I'm giving it 1 and 4 is because I don't want it to blink 50% of the time. And if you do want it to blink 50% of the time, just delete these two falses. And now it's choose true or false. But again, I'm giving it a 1 out of 4 chance to choose true. And let's say it's chosen true. Now we need to blink. So let's change our sprite index to blink. S player idle blink. That's what I named it. And let's set our image speed to 0 in case somewhere in our code our image speed was set to 1. Or let's set it to 1 in case it was set to 0 before. And now our animation will play. And let's say if choose is not equal true, so one of the other 3 cases, then we'll use else, and we need to pick a random I variation to go through. And you can use as many as you want, and I'll show you how. We're going to use the choose statement again. It's a really cool a really cool function. So we're going to use choose, and we're going to type in all the different sprites that we can choose from. So we're going to use sPlayer idle I move 1. I'm going to copy and paste. I'm actually going to maximize this. I'm going to copy and paste and change the value to 2 and then 3, and then I'm going to copy and paste this whole line so I can increase to the next line. I'm going to do 4, 5, 6, and I have a 7th, so I'm going to copy and paste a 7th, get rid of that comma, and we need to set our sprite index to be one of these. So we actually got to go in front of the choose. I'll give you 3 seconds to finish typing this or pause. 3, 2, 1. And now I'm going to do sprite index equals, and I'm going to have to fix the spacing here. And there we go. It's going to choose one of these sprites to change to. And let's say now that the animation timer is not less than or equal to 0. Well, in that case, we just need to check to see if our sprite is blinking, because if our sprite's blinking, right now we're not checking for its animation's end, so it's just going to keep blinking. The animation's going to keep looping over and over and over until the timer runs out, and that's going to look weird. It's going to look like he has a twitch or something, I don't know. And so let's just check for the animation to end. So we'll do if. First, let's check what our sprite index is. Sprite index equals sPlayer idle blink. Then we'll check for our image index, which is the current frame being displayed on screen, is greater than or equal to image number, which is the total amount of images in that sprite. And I found that this doesn't work real well, and I'm not sure why, but I have to use a minus, or at least like a 0.2 or 0.3 for this to be accurate. So I'm going to actually put minus 0.3 at the end of that image number. And if someone knows why this happens or a way around this without doing this 0.3 thing, let me know. But for me, the 0.3 seems to work just fine. And if you use 0.1, it's actually going to skip a frame usually. It's not going to play the last frame, so that's why I'm using a 0.3. So if our image index is greater than that image number, minus 0.3, then we want to change our sprite back to sPlayer idle, which is our still frame. So it's going to blink and it's going to go back to the still frame. And one last thing, when you're using random, you have to use the randomize function at the creation of the game or at some time before it's called, because GameMaker puts a generalized seed for random to play from, and every time this is called, it's always going to be the same value because the seed is not being generated at runtime. It's only being generated at compile time. So what we're going to do is go into our object or our initialized game controller script and go to the bottom of it and just type randomize. It's really simple. Don't be scared of it. Randomize, good to go. Now our stuff should work. Let's check it out. Okay, so I got some errors. I'm always wrong. So I'm going to click on the error, line 29. I don't know what I did here. I need to put sprite index equals sPlayerIdle. I just typed in sPlayerIdle for some reason, wasn't thinking. And let's see what happens now. All right, let's watch him. Okay, his eyes are moving. You can see he's got a little bit of attitude sometimes. That's what I was talking about. He's like, why are you keeping me here? What's going on? I'm going to blink a little bit. Let's blink a little bit. Let's see if our jetpack works. I don't even know if we tested that. I don't remember at this point. But our jetpack should work. You see he's moving up and down. Looks super cool. I mean, this is smooth, guys. Doesn't get much better than this at a 16 by 16 resolution. I think it looks pretty good. So in the next following tutorials, I'll be going over how to make the gun shoot. We'll be creating projectiles, and I'll be taking ideas in the next few videos on what kind of environment art we want, and that'll be the following videos after we implement shooting. We might do a health bar, and we'll implement a way to change the fire rate at real time so we can level our guy up and have him increase his how fast he's shooting and all that kinds of stuff. So we're about to get into really interesting stuff. Like I said, leave ideas down in the comments for the game, what you kind of visualize by looking at this character now. You can see what he looks like, and I'm sure you have some kind of visualization of what you'd like to see, and I'm going to teach you guys how to do that. So thank you for watching this video. I know it's a long one, and like I said, this was going to be a pretty long video. And if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. And if you didn't enjoy it, subscribe anyways, because whatever, you can dislike it. I don't care. So hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next video.